Hello, everybody. It is February 7th, 2026 here in the United States of America. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the death of democracy. When I say death of democracy, though, I'm not talking about democracy from the perspective of like a neoliberal who's screaming into the sky that we must save our democracy must be preserved, democracy is my religion, and everything I believe in it is my identity. And when they say democracy, they just mean, well, as long as the government goes the way that I want in regard to my political and economic and social points of view, then it is our sacred democracy. But if it goes the other way, then it must be fascism. And that's kind of the point I'm getting at here. Democracy seems to only be useful so long as it's giving the desired results from whatever side is currently advocating for it. Across the West, when democracy begins to swing back towards the right, which it has recently, it is decried as, fascism. It has morphed into fascism. It is no longer democracy. It's not giving me the desired results now, so I have to tear the whole system down and resort to something akin to fascism myself to preserve the world that I wish to see. And that's kind of the problem. The West has been separated up, I would say, into two prominent political camps, both kind of comprised of different groups that don't necessarily agree with each other, but they have a similar worldview. And you have the, let's say, neoliberal leftists who want open borders, radical changes with culture and sexuality and religion, complete reshaping of society into some kind of equitable paradise, if you will. And then on the opposite side, you have groups that are attempting to preserve tradition, preserve societies in the way that they see fit, preserve the status quo, maybe rip the status quo down, replace it with something a bit more radical, maybe even replace it with something entirely undemocratic. You have the West largely divided up into these two kinds of groups. Again, they're not all the same. Both are comprised of different political parties, different political philosophies that don't necessarily agree with each other at all. But I would say that's kind of the dividing line in most of the West. You have a set of principles on this side that people are advocating for, and a set of principles on this side that people are advocating for. Problem is, these two points of view, the more traditionalist right-wing, libertarian, center-right, center-left worldview cannot seem to coexist in the same political system as, say, the radical left, globalist, neoliberal point of view. They're completely incompatible with one another. Now, they're both trying to inhabit the same democratic system. So here in the United States, for example, every time there's a presidential election now at this point, it's an existential crisis for one side of the country. Because no matter who wins, one side of the country is going to, or they're going to fear that they're going to see extreme radical changes and their entire world flipped upside down. And that's essentially true. I think the Republican and Democratic parties are so far apart from one another on many social issues and economic issues. Case in point, Virginia. The most recent election down there resulted in a governor that is pushing extremely unpopular and stupid taxation proposals, not based off any kind of competent governance and actually taking care of the people, but it's simply, we have to support the ideology, we have to support our worldview, regardless of whether or not it makes people upset. One of the a big cultural thing here in the United States, gun rights. Okay, so Americans, generally speaking, in most states are allowed to own semi-automatic rifles. Okay, Virginia is a state with a lot of gun owners. And this new governor comes in, despite that, it says, we are going to ban semi-automatic firearms, we're going to ban high-capacity magazines and eventually get rid of these firearms altogether. I'm sure that's on the table as well, despite the fact that more than half our state's population is going to refuse to obey that law because it's so unpopular and antithetical to the culture of the people living in the state. Okay, so democracy for them becomes the existential struggle. It's not just a matter of, okay, well, we got a new governor, some tax codes might change, a couple other things might change, they might run things a little bit different, maybe be a bit more hands-on or hands-off, pro-business, anti-business. It's not that anymore. No, it's, well, we're going to advocate for extremely radical things that half the population is going to reject out of hand because it's, again, completely antithetical to their worldview. And now this is across the country. Say if Kamala Harris were to have won the last presidential election, this country would have changed radically, very radically, and 70 to 80 million Americans would have been vehemently opposed to it. There would have been no unity there. I mean, just as there's no unity now that Donald Trump has won. Because, again, we can't even enforce. We've got to the point where the differences are so profound that immigration laws can't even really be enforced without the threat of civil war. Again, because the competing worldviews between the two sides of the country are both radically, completely different. You have one group of people that view citizenship as something sacred, something for Americans born in America, or for people that have immigrated legally and spent plenty of time here becoming Americanized, becoming what's the word for it? Assimilated, and actually working towards their citizenship. That's how citizenship is viewed, and voting rights are only for American citizens. Now you have the opposite block, the more radical left, that views, well, that doesn't think any human being is illegal. There are no borders. That voting rights should be given to illegal immigrants, and the citizenship is not something that's sacred. Citizenship is just something that you have a right to. There's no work, there's no effort put into it. There's no common sense system of control over it. It's just, well, whoever wants to come in can come in, regardless of how much it might radically change the country. Now, if you look at this from a neutral perspective, whenever you bring large amounts of people into a country, you give them voting rights and you usurp and marginalize the native population, and then you radically change the face of that country. You're looking at a civil war. Eventually something is going to give, and something is going to collapse, and there will be a spark that ignites the powder keg. Okay, I'm not advocating for that, but that's just common sense. If you look across the West, say Britain, for example, Britain is teetering on the edge of that. I think it's much closer than people realize. And if this trend continues within the British government of marginalizing their own people for the sake of imported labor, and then having like a two-tier justice system to enforce this, then eventually people are going to have enough. They're not going to really care about their comforts anymore. They're not really going to care about again, like being comfortable and cozy. They're going to push them to a point of discomfort where they won't care about those things anymore. And, all they have left is, well, not sure where I was going with that. Sorry. But what I'm saying is, eventually, some kind of civil conflict will happen because people will get so angry. Just to sum it up, I'm trying a little too hard to explain that. And at that point, okay, say if things were to swing back towards the right in a, and that like the actual right, not the British version of it, which does nothing, then you would have half the country up in arms because democracy didn't give them the result that they wanted. Therefore, they must resist by force if necessary. And see, that's the problem now. Because democracy is only useful now if one side wins and the other side loses. It's only useful to the side that wins. If it's no longer giving those results, then, well, it's a useless system. And I think everyone pretending that they're actually trying to save democracy is full of it. They just want their guy, their political party to win. And I think as the West becomes more pluralistic, and as the gulf widens even further between our political factions and the worldviews that they have, I think democracy will become less and less relevant. And I think out of frustration, people will probably turn towards something a bit more authoritarian that's going to give them the results that they desire. If the current government isn't providing peace, security, stability, a solid economy, and something for the future, something for the people's children and grandchildren, if it's not giving them that, and all it's giving them is chaos and anarchy, well, I think people are going to give up on the democratic project pretty quickly. Now, democracy could have kept working in the West. Republican-style governments could have kept working in the West if the West did not engage in this insane self-destructive project of introducing, extreme radical social views into their college campuses. We weren't embracing radical egalitarianism. We weren't embracing radical political systems and views on immigration, and we weren't trying to diversify our societies to the point where they're no longer stable. If these things wouldn't have happened, and the West would have maintained its health in regard to these areas, and kept immigration at a reasonable level, weren't tolerating more extreme worldviews propagating on college campuses and among the media, then yes, democratic systems would have remained stable. But because the differences in views between different political parties are so extreme now that it's not really a tenable system, and eventually it's going to collapse. I think democracy will die in the West in some fashion. I think people promoting things like fascism or communism or even monarchy in countries that don't really have a history of it, I don't think those people will be successful in implementing their worldview either. Something I could kind of see happening in the United States, and what might be a necessity, and I'm not advocating for it, is something along the lines of a Caesar, if you will. Somebody who comes in to the political system, a strongman, a politically competent strongman, taking the reins of the American political system and setting things right, but in a way that's palatable to most people, kind of like what Augustus did, where yes, of course he was emperor, but from the outside looking in, he kept up appearances of the republic, but he cleaned house and cleaned up the mess and stabilized the Roman world for quite some time. I think eventually that's going to happen, maybe in the United States. I think that's what a lot of people are yearning for across Europe, especially people more on the center-right, right-wing side of things. Democracy isn't providing them the results that they want anymore, and I think many of them are giving up on it. I think people on the left probably feel the same way. They're not getting the worldview that they want. I think public opinion is swinging against them in many instances, where they're losing the goodwill that they had amongst the people for the last 10 years, because the things that they implement have become disastrous and unpopular and are resulting in chaos. So they're going to be left in a situation where they have this quasi-religious desire to impose their worldview on the world, and the current democratic system isn't giving them what they want. So what do? Maybe they implement some kind of system that has the appearances of democracy, but all the elections are fixed and rigged in their favor, which seems like that's actually happening. Now, this is just a reality. This is just the political reality across the West. Again, as political opinions become more irreconcilable with one another, the two ends of the system are going to be pulled like this until something breaks. I'm not advocating for the destruction of democracy. I'm not advocating for the rise of fascism or something like that. This is just an inevitability. This is the result of our stupid post-Enlightenment experiment that we've engaged in. The Western world, post-Enlightenment, not the Western world, the Western elites thought they were the smartest people on the planet. They thought they could build the perfect societies. They thought they could be a beacon unto the rest of the world. They were more advanced. They were better than everybody else. And we could be an example for all the world to follow, to have our perfect liberal democracies, the end of history, the end of fascism, and the end of authoritarian governments, and we could have this wonderful egalitarian, pluralistic, tolerant societies. Well, that ended in abject failure. It's ending in chaos. It's ending in the opposite of what they promised. And I think that's one of the consequences of the Enlightenment, not to go off on a tangent, but they disregarded sacred knowledge and common sense passed down over hundreds of years and how to competently govern a civilization and what worked and what didn't. They threw that out the window for something better because they knew better than their forefathers. They were enlightened. They were scientists. They threw away the shackles of religion and Christianity, and they thought they could build a wonderful secular society. And while it seemed like it worked for a little bit, eventually it all came crashing down. And these systems of democracy and republicanism Republican-style governments that we place on a pedestal and almost make holy have become like unworkable because of our arrogance over the last several hundred years. But anyways, that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. I will be back tomorrow with a live stream during the afternoon at some point, probably around 2 or 3. And you guys all have a good one, and see you tomorrow.